what I
time.
was reading this morning was the translation of Bo Gräsland's book, published in Swedish, called The Nordic Beowulf, in which he says it is generally agreed now that Beowulf is the composition of an English Christian poet. And he says, basically, why do we think that? And the answer is, of course, well, it's in English. But the strange thing about the poem has always been that while it's in English, it never mentions England or Britain or anybody English, and it's entirely set in southern Scandinavia in the early 6th century. So what the poem tells us internally, you might say, is absolutely different from what it tells us externally. And Bo Gräsland is quite right, I think, in saying that this ought to have been a subject of more inquiry. Uh, and I've done my best to say what I think about that. But of course, it's also the case that the modern consensus is very largely created by Tolkien. And in this case, and in others, I think Tolkien got it wrong, for his own reasons, of course. If he was here to speak up, he'd probably say, yeah, yes, I knew all that, but I didn't want to say it at that point. All right. But the level of knowledge of post-Roman Scandinavia, which you get in Beowulf, is really quite remarkable. And you have to wonder where it came from. Well, Bo's theory is that it was in fact created in Scandinavia, and it must have been translated or passed on in some way to England, but we don't know how. And that's possible, but I must say I haven't quite got the chain of transmission in my head yet. But perhaps as I read the book a bit more, I'll find out. I once wrote an article about uh, local history and it affects the scholarship of Beowulf. And it was kind of funny because the home village of my family has been cited as the site of Beowulf. And my colleague Andreas Horda in Denmark, his village too had been cited as the original site of Beowulf. And of course, they're both wrong. But people feel very attached to their homelands and they want to pull things into them. And Bo Gräsland obviously comes from Gotland, the island off the Swedish coast, and he says the poem comes from Gotland. So he's in a fine tradition, represented by me and Andreas Horda and himself, and I've no doubt half a dozen other people like Sam Newton. But all of these have to be taken with a certain allowance for partiality, shall we say. Um, However, there's some quite strong reasons for thinking Beowulf might come from the area I come from, and I could tell you what they were, but I suspect people wouldn't believe me. There you go.
Tom, why don't you tell us the reasons?
Um, well, one is that it's very, this of course is a point that Gräsland makes. It's very odd that Beowulf is described as a Geat. Who the hell were they? Well, we've all decided they were the Gautar of southern Sweden, but they play absolutely no part in Anglo-Saxon life or tradition or anything as far as we know. Well, perhaps they do, because Bede remarks on a place which he calls in Getlingum, in the home of the Yeatlings, and that actually is Gillingshire. Gillingshire is now a vanished administrative unit, but it used to stretch from East Gilling to West Gilling, and it's North Yorkshire, which is, of course, where my family come from. That's one thing. Another thing pointed out by a professor at Leeds, not me, one of my predecessors, is that the area has got a lot of heroic names in it. And the point I made, actually, is that if you look at a kind of section of names, which is called the Northern Index, something like that. how many Higelacs are there in the whole of Anglo-Saxon tradition? We know thousands of names. The answer is there's one way down south and a whole number in North Yorkshire. And the same goes another character who doesn't appear anywhere in the kind of name history of Anglo-Saxon is the king of the Yeats called Hrethric. Um, but he's there. He's there behind names like Riddlesden in North Yorkshire. So there were people in North Yorkshire who called their children habitually after the names of the vanished Yeatish dynasty, of which we know nothing elsewhere. So perhaps there was a South Swedish element in the incomers in the 6th century, and they brought their traditions with them. Another thing, well, another thing which kind of goes along with that is if you look hard at Old English, the nature of Old English, there is an element in it, not of West Scandinavian, but of North Scandinavian, and that is well before the Viking era. So there were North Scandinavians in the 6th century immigration into England, and obviously they brought knowledge with them. Why they wanted to preserve it, why they wanted to keep it, why they wanted to make a story out of it, don't know. But it's that must be what happened, really. Um, just in what form it happened, well, we don't know about that.
You said Hrethric and you meant Hrethel, right?
I did. You're quite right. Stupid of me. I meant Hrethel, not Hrethric, Hrethel. So you get Riddlesden, as I say.
Exactly.
Hmm.
And the other professor you were referring to was F.W. Mormon.
Yes, it was actually. Old
Yeah.
Fred Moorman. Yeah, yeah. I never met him, but I met his son.
So
And
I'm,
I'll tell you
I'm
another point, actually, which is that another of the very odd things about Beowulf is it's kind of wishy-washy on paganism. Um, it is clear that all the characters must have been pagan, but the author won't say so, and he won't condemn them, and he just avoids the subject. Well, who else does that? I would suggest that, gosh, there's one text which does very much the same thing, and it was written in Whitby about the year 710. So now I'd have to look up what it was. It was a saint's life. Um, I think it was the life of Gregory the Great, which contains a passage which clearly indicates that pagans can be saved retroactively, which is not sound dogma at all, but nevertheless, that's what it says. And the other thing that I would point out is that I keep saying Beowulf is the only text which knows correctly the proper name of the foundation of the Frankish dynasty. Um, Everybody else, all the Latin writers, get it wrong. But Beowulf gets it right, though transposed into Old English. Well, who else does that? And again, it's a text which mentions Frankish names and automatically renders them into good Old English. And once again, I've forgotten what the text is, but that too is North Yorkshire in the early 8th century.
so the,
So,
the text you're referring to, it's not the life of Wilfrid, is it?
no, I mean,
No,
you
it's
know,
not.
it might be. It might well be,
Yeah.
actually.
Well,
Perhaps
the
you're right.
options, I know what your options are. The options are the life of Wilfrid, the life of Gregory. I think there's two lives of Cuthbert that are
Yeah. Yeah.
all of these texts date to this, circa
Yes.
700.
Well, I guess the life of Gregory is the one that's wishy-washy on paganism, and the life of Wilfrid is the one which mentions a number of Frankish names.
Yeah, the life of Wilfrid is from 710. That's
Yeah,
that's definitely the date of it. That's actually all of those texts were edited and translated by Bertram Colgrave.
yeah,
That's one thing they all have in common, and they're all very excellently translated and produced editions. And I really
mhm,
admire that whole
yeah, yeah.
series.
Mhm.
And actually, for scholars who are looking for stuff to write about, I think that they would do well to turn to
Yeah.
those
Mhm.
texts,
Mhm.
since they are, you know, very rich sources from the Anglo-Saxon period, and yet pretty infrequently studied these days.
Mhm. Mhm. Yes, once again, uh, unfairly neglected, as we have said with reference to other things. But that's quite right. Mm.
Yeah. Well, I'm pleased to know, Tom, that you're still thinking about the localization of Beowulf, and that clearly this is a
Yeah.
matter of unending interest for you.
Yeah,
Uh,
yes. Oh well, perhaps I'll turn up some better evidence another day. But there we go. At least as a counterblast to Sam Newton, because Sam Newton is a Suffolk chauvinist. Um, Far be it from me to be a North Yorkshire chauvinist, because I'm not. I'm absolutely impartial. I'm just pointing a few things out. Yes, right. Uh,
that would
I'm
be a
sure Sam would
fun.
have a few words to say about that.
Well, it would be fun to get Sam to get a kind of debate.
It would actually, yes, that's right. It would be
Who's
quite
Beowulf?
funny. Yeah. Uh,
That would be, yeah, definitely worth
yeah,
get views on YouTube. That's for sure.
yeah. Yes.